Welcome to the Black Paper. My name is Ndukwe Onoha. Good morning. Wherever yeah, because Teta, we increasingly we're seeing that we're getting listeners from all over the place, which is good.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's what makes it worth doing this.
Yes. So I think before we start, it's good. It only makes sense to say thank you to our listeners, thank you to people who have written into us. We appreciate you, and we are encouraged by your support, and we hope to keep making your listening worth the while.
Please share.
And please
What
share,
it
yes,
is.
please share. So Cheta, back in the 60s, not that we were alive then, but from what we gather, there was this thing called the Summer of Love, which is when a lot of those our parents who now will want to act like they're holier than uh, any holy person who has ever walked the earth, let themselves go. It was a summer of love. It was a summer of carefree attitude. Well, at least in the US and some parts of Europe. Uh, however, in
So as you were talking this one, I wanted to exonerate my parents. In back during the period of the summer of love, my parents were dodging a war.
they were dodging bullets, yes, sadly, and that at some point is something we should also touch on the conflict on the continent and how they affect all of us. However, in 2025, starting from 2024, really, we can say that what we've had, rather than summers of love, is summers of anger and frustration and anti-migrant rhetoric and tensions in communities. And that is what we want to talk about today. Um, it's August the 9th, 2025. There are different messages going on about marches uh, to claim back, as they say, uh, the UK from people like us. So, Cheta, shall we delve into it?
Yes, we shall.
All right. So, what's going on? Why are we seeing possible protests breaking out across the UK yet again?
Well, it's not possible protest. Protests are already happening.
Hmm.
There are a lot of protests happening all over the place, and there are two core issues that are driving protests. So the first issue, which is if your diet of information is right wing media or right leaning media, then you would think that the only issue people are protesting about is immigration. So there are people in front of so the UK has a system where so there are two sets of immigrants. There are the legal migrants, people like you, and then there are the illegal migrants, people who have who a few years ago we would have called asylum seekers. They've been, for whatever reason, they've taken small boats from France. So maybe it's important to briefly look at geography. The UK is an island nation, has always been an island nation. So people who are escaping from, say, if for example, we a few episodes ago we talked about the whole war between Israel and Iran. If that war had escalated and a lot of people had fled, they would have been. If I use the expression, they could walk from Tehran to Berlin. Um, they could walk from Tehran to Paris as well, or walk from Tel Aviv to Paris. Now, when they get to Paris, when they get to Calais, they are stopped by a rather large body of water, 23 miles of water, the English Channel. So many of these people who, one of the things that makes the UK attractive to a lot of migrants is the fact that English is which is the language that developed in the UK over the last 500 years in the form that we know it, is the de facto global language because of two reasons. Number one, the British Empire, and number two, the American Empire. So a lot of people speak English. A lot of people know someone, whether it is just tangential knowledge or actual knowledge, they know someone in the UK. So that makes the UK a natural magnet to attract migrants. And then when you consider the political storm, the result of the political storm of Brexit, the UK actually needs labor, a lot of labor. So that makes it very easy for people to come to the UK and then find work, especially at the lower end of society. And I think that's one of the key lacunas that's happening. Um, there's a need, but the natives, British natives, do not accept that. Their government has recognized that. And because the economy has not been doing so well, when you look at things like, for example, the G7, the UK has been the slowest of the G7 economies to recover from COVID. There's a sense among British people that they are not doing well. So what has happened is that right-wing people, a lot of right-wingers, have used the classic trope of blame the immigrants for your issues. And that has people have listened. um, like I said a couple of episodes ago, it's something that happens throughout history. When things are going wrong, unscrupulous politicians will always blame the foreigner. And unfortunately, it's one of those lessons human beings really don't learn
Mm.
from history. It will always happen again and again. So think of, if we go back to where we came from. Ghana first chased away Nigerians in 1969. What was the problem? The Ghanaian economy was not doing well. This was post the coup that removed Kwame Nkrumah, and so was it Tata Akifo, the military leader at the time, blamed Nigerians. Nigeria was involved in the war at the time, and Ghana expelled Nigerians. Fast forward the hands of the clock 11 years. Nigeria had gone through an oil boom. Our economy was doing well, doing very well, I would say. And then in 1979, towards the end of 1979, shortly after the Shagari government took over, the economy collapsed. And the year 1980 was a very, very bad year for Nigeria economically. And the Shagari government, the civilian government at the time, found itself becoming increasingly unpopular. So what did it do? It blamed Ghanaians, and it gave Ghanaians in Nigeria 2 weeks to leave the country. And in in this part of the world, people would tend to be quote and unquote civilized in doing such things. I mean, the riots from last year proved that wrong. In our part of the world, if the government gives Ghanaians 2 weeks to leave, things can get very, very nasty very, very quickly. And it was from that the whole Ghana must go thing was born. Um, but the common thread that I'm trying to draw here to link all of this is when people feel economically disenfranchised, it is very easy for politicians, for unscrupulous politicians, I must say, to blame Johnny Foreigner for their problems rather than blaming bad decisions, bad political or economic decisions made by the government. And unfortunately, as history has shown again and again, it is very easy for a mass of people to listen to such unscrupulous politicians.
So is it then a case because li- going down history, it's almost like what we said in a previous episode is rinse and repeat. We've seen this all over again, but for some weird reason, and I don't know why, I can't put my finger to it, but we almost seem to think that we will take a leaf from the pages of history, but then get a different result because we sort of like have you see that we have that mindset that we're exceptional because people when we rightly point to history will point to Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, but then you see that's not just that. You have the partition of India, for instance. It was again around the same rhetoric, foreign invaders, and led to 15 million people displaced. You had Uganda, the expulsion of Asians from Uganda. You have Myanmar, Rohingya genocide. This was even more recent.
Contemporary.
The
It's
yeah,
still happening.
it's still happening. The Bosnia ethnic cleansing, Dominican Republic's expulsion of Haitians from 2013. Of course, you have Trump and his ongoing campaign. Italy's anti-Roma policies. South Africa's, in fact, for South Africa, I remember I think it was 2013. I was in South Africa when it kicked off in, I think it was Port Elizabeth. And it was just, I couldn't wrap my head around it because I thought to myself, hang on, but we're Africans, aren't we? We've been fighting for United States of Africa, as as it were, as some people want to call it. So why is it that again, when you look at the country that has just come out relatively from the scourge of apartheid, suddenly thinking, you know what, I am going to other the other. And of course, in the UK here, we have the hostile environment from 2014 um, onwards. So the thing is, and if you look at the footprint of all these places, it has never ended in people just protesting, going home, everything's all right. It's always been ramped up little by little. Starts with the protest, a little attack here, a little attack there, then full blown war, as it were, on communities. Is there a danger that Cheta, you and I will be locked up in our home, not because we're working from home, but because we are too scared to step out of our front doors very soon?
Good question. And good uh, uh, build up to the question. I would like to of the events that you listed, I would like to draw two out and move them away from it. The partition of India, following independence, wasn't because of economic reasons. That was because of the British divide and rule
Yeah.
colonial policy. It simply the British deliberately, and this was something that they stoked in every place that they colonized. They didn't do it as badly in places that they settled, but places that they colonized and did not settle in large numbers. For example, Nigeria, they they basically set up the big groups against one another. The difference, like I said exactly in the last episode, the difference between in Nigeria and India is that we were better behaved than the Indians and did not start fighting each other as soon as the British left. The Indians began their own, and that's what led to the partition of
Well,
India.
we only gave it like what, 3 years?
We
So
gave it six. Then Bosnia is also different. Bosnia was Yugoslavia was not a historical country. It emerged at the end of the First World War. That's after 1918. I think it became a country officially in 1922. And then following the Second World War, it was held together by Joseph Tito. Basically, he was a dictator, and he was one of those very, very strong men who held the whole thing together. He died in 1980, and pretty much as soon as he died, uh, all the various groups that have been agitating, people like Slobodan Milosevic, all those guys, suddenly began to find their voice and began to other the other parts of the country, and that's held or that's deteriorated very quickly until war broke out in '92. So those were two different, but the common thread to every other one that you listed, when you look at it, is the economy was in a bad position. So think of, for example, South Africa. It's very interesting because um, I was also in South Africa in 2013, but shortly after the Nations Cup. If you remember, the Nations Cup, which Nigeria won, ended on February 13th, 2013. Valentine's Day was the next day, and that was a little lower my voice a bit. I proposed to my wife that day, so that was the reason. So it
no wonder you remember the exact date, because
it
I was
was a
like,
it was a no it was a basically it was something that I had planned, and
uh-huh.
it just so happened that it coincided with the nice thing
So
of
so Cheta,
Nigeria winning
let,
the
let me
Nations
let me
Cup.
get this straight.
But the
Did you
point I'm
go to
trying to make,
watch the Nations Cup, or did you just plan it that I would take this woman, I'll watch the Nations Cup, and then to make up for it, I'll propose?
I'm not an American citizen, but I beg to play the Fifth Amendment here. So anyway, the point is because of the fallout, fallout is not quite the word, the boost provided by the Nations Cup. Hosting a football tournament, especially when you host it well, when you do it well, provides an injection into the economy. And remember that South Africa, this was 3 years after South Africa hosted the World Cup as well. So, because of the boost provided by the World Cup and then the Nations Cup, South Africa was a pretty happy place
Mm.
as of the time that we were there. So we stayed a week. It was a pretty happy place. Speaking with people, all of that, they were all happy. They saw a future. So it was one of those things that was very, very interesting for me because it was about 6 months later that the whole sentiment against foreigners suddenly kicked off.
Kicked off, yeah.
Basically, there were some very bad economic decisions that hit very, very quickly. But you can also say that some of these bad economic decisions had been taken earlier, and then they all because your average. So there are two kinds of economic decisions, broadly speaking, micro and macro. The effects of macroeconomic decisions tend to go through the system and hit the system between 5 years and a decade from when they were taken. While the effects of micro decisions can hit the economy very, very quickly. Whenever I asked some South African friends about they they point out, some decisions that were taken by the Zuma government about 2009, thereabouts, which all came to a head with decisions that were taken by the same Zuma government
Mm.
about early 2013. So the thing about a bad economy, and I think it's important to point out that the resentment that drives anti-immigrant sentiment always exists. Human beings, as we are, tend to fear the other or tend to distrust the other. But when there is plenty, which is another way of saying when the economy is doing well, we are able to put those fears behind ourselves. When there isn't plenty, when we now have to struggle for resources, the default behavior of most human beings will be to try to exclude the other so that he will get a bigger share of the pie.
So, but is that again? I would like to sort of like slightly push back on that or ask a question around that because are you saying or do you believe then that the whole lot of the anti-migrant rhetoric, in many countries, even though yes, there's proof that this is ramped up when there's an economic downturn, but is it purely a show of frustration with how the economy is? Is it survival instinct, or is there something that is ingrained that the economy is then used as an excuse to show, you know what, I just do not like this other person.
It's all of it. I just answered that earlier. I said human beings, by default, we tend to distrust the other. We tend to distrust the other. That is human nature. That's
Is
the
it
base
distrust
human
or
nature.
dislike though?
Dislike feeds from distrust. It's when you don't trust somebody, it's very difficult to like the person. So the most fundamental dividing line between human beings is language. It's not even color of skin. Color of skin and all of that builds up on language. But the most fundamental dividing block among human beings is language. When I can't understand what the other person is saying, when two people or when if three people are together, and this is something that you and I have seen a lot in Nigeria. So me and you are together, we both speak Igbo, then maybe we are with a Yoruba friend, and then you want to tell me something and you speak Igbo, and the Yoruba guy immediately becomes uncomfortable. A reason why, so I, who for example is in an interethnic marriage, a reason why I put my ear on the ground to at least understand some Yoruba is that when my wife and her siblings are together, even in my presence, they can't help it. They will speak Yoruba. And there's that unconscious, it's an unconscious bias that is hard coded in every human being. You want to know what these people are talking about. Are they planning a coup against me in my house? You want to have an idea of what they're talking about. So that is the most fundamental dividing block between humans. And depending on the disposition of the person involved, it creates a dividing line. It divides.
It,
So
it,
yeah,
yeah.
go.
So yeah, some would argue otherwise, though. Some would argue that sometimes people are treated or uh, given some either level of access or a certain type of treatment without even conversation, uh, just by how they look. So I'll give you an example. So if you take the
It,
US, for instance,
yeah,
uh,
I want to,
yeah,
if you
yeah.
don't
But
mind, it
if
it
you take
builds
the
on that.
yeah, but the US, if you look at the racial tensions in the US, for the most part, especially with the African American communities and the Caucasian community, they speak the same language. They've spoken the same language for ages, and still the
The argument
distrust.
can be made that the Boston American, the WASP strain of American English is different from Ebonics.
Yeah, but it's not so that you can't understand what they're saying.
Yes, I
However,
agree
when
with
when
that.
when 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 a police officer pulls some guy over from afar, which is why there's the argument of profiling. That person has been profiled. There's that thought that, well, if this person, I mean, I've seen videos where people are stopped just for the fact that I don't think you belong in this neighborhood or you live here.
Yes,
You have to.
I agree.
So
I agree with you.
so
So again,
language can only go so far. However, which is why my argument would be: is there something even deeper? Language might have been a starting point. However, over time, has it calcified into it just don't look like us? And this is why, and perhaps we'll talk about it in the second part. The current creeping into the UK. I mean, this has gone on in Europe for a while, but in the UK, suddenly we're having talks around remigration. And the
it's
thing is,
sorry, Onjukwe,
mhm,
if permit me to interrupt you.
mm,
Let's not make the mistake of saying or thinking that the current is just creeping into the UK. It's always been in the UK.
no, 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 I'm talking
Enoch
about the in public discourse
Yeah,
now.
Enoch Powell made his Rivers of Blood speech in 1968.
Oh yeah, well he did.
Neither of us was here in
True that.
1968. So
True that.
neither of our parents had not even met in 1968. So Enoch Powell made that speech then, and even before that, is it Owen Morsey, the fascist British fascist party in the 1930s. So it's always been there. My own argument is, see, human beings will always divide themselves based on one criteria or the other. The example that you gave of the American racism is an extremely valid example. But what I'm saying is, before communities that have different skin colors come into contact with one another, you have communities of the same skin color. So take Europe, for example. Europe spent so much time, and this is we're going back 400 years, 500 years. They spent so much time fighting one another, even before many of them had set eyes on a black person. Same way, in our own neck of the woods in Africa, we had many communities. One of the things that drove the slave trade when the slave trade began to become industrial was the fact that certain communities and empires were empowered to go and attack other kingdoms, other empires to get slaves, to get people to kidnap people who they sold. What was the underlying thing? They did not go to attack themselves. The Bini Empire, for example, consistently went to raid other outlying kingdoms who did not speak their language. Ergo, they were different. So racism is the eventual child, the eventual descendant of what some people will call tribalism, but it's basically ethno-linguistic difference. Every other
So
thing
the
builds
F
from that.
and the ethno there is what I'm also
Yeah.
harping on. So it's not just linguistic, but it's ethno-linguistic. So you
Well,
don't speak my
yeah,
language, you don't follow my faith, you don't follow my beliefs, my customs,
precisely.
you don't share my worldview.
The
So
most important marker
it's a
of
wrap of things.
ethnicity, yeah, the
Mm.
most important marker of ethnicity is language.
I think on that note, shall we take a short break? And when we come back, we'll talk more around the idea of remigration and also um, just what the hell is it that these migrants bring to the UK?
No problem.
Nah, no wahala.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Black Paper. My name is Sundukwe Onoha.
And I'm Cheta Wanze.
Uh, uh, so, Jeda, in the first half, we spoke about the protests that are cropping up here and there in the UK, and then, of course, laid the foundation for why we're seeing that, mostly the economy and people's response to the economy, and looked also as how different societies have always reached into the same bag of tricks every time, hoping to get a different result. And one of those things that we're seeing being openly talked about now, maybe it's because of the prevalence of the social media, how we're now able to get a larger picture of what people are saying, and they're not just behind closed doors anymore. I'll just give you an example of a tweet on remigration. Someone just said, "Now do remigration." Again, I don't want to have to call out. I don't want to read the person's names. But then there's a video here from the British Patriots. So this looks like a group saying breaking. Yes, of course. Thousands of British citizens have taken control of Norwich streets outside a hotel, housing illegal migrants, blocking the entire roads in a massive show of force. The revolution has officially begun. And then there's a hashtag in response, remigration. So the thing is, Chita, what is this idea of remigration and why is it a dangerous one?
So the idea of remigration, which the risk of sounding sort of obtuse, will not happen. Um, but it's a rallying cry that people will rally around. The idea of remigration is basically that the demographics of our country is changing very rapidly, so that all the migrants, all the people who are not native, who can't trace their ancestry back to a particular point, who can't trace their ancestry in this country back to a particular point, should be put on planes or boats or whatever and deported back to where they came from. Now, a basic form of remigration has been tried before. It wasn't tried in the way it's being suggested, but basically you had the Nazis. So there were certain Nazi organizations you could not get into, or certain positions you could not take if you couldn't prove your pure blood back to 1750, the year 1750. So that is at least 200 years from around that period. So that's the reason why I say it just won't happen. Secondly, the critical thing that will make it impossible, that will make it impractical, is the fact that the British economy, the European economy, they depend very heavily on migrants. There's something that is happening around the world, especially in the advanced world. Populations are shrinking, and in Europe, you have the welfare states. The welfare states needs people to work, needs people to fill in those gaps. So a very good petri dish that's I think everybody should watch is Japan. Japan is a country that historically has been very hostile to migrants. The Japanese have a word gaijin to describe foreigners, and the only foreigners that the Japanese have quote and unquote accepted, and that was at the point of a gun, or better still, at the tip of an atomic bomb, is the Americans. But even at that, the Americans never integrated into Japanese society. You find that it's very. If you look at the Japanese parliament, for example, you don't see, even though there are quite a number, and I can't say offhand the proportion of the Japanese population now that is of mixed ancestry. The Korean Japanese, because remember that Japan colonized Korea for between 1905 and 1945, and moved a lot of Koreans to Japan. Even those Koreans who have been in Japan for more than 100 years now have never fully integrated. So what is now happening in Japan is that Japan has a negative birth rate. Last year, that's 2024, the Japanese population shrank by about 900,000 people. So more people died in Japan than were born. So even Japan has slowly started coming around. It's been done kicking and screaming, but kicking and screaming, nevertheless, it's happening. They are beginning to open the door for migrants. It's just that their conditions are so onerous, but nevertheless, the door has opened.
The
So,
question will be what sort of migrants, though?
well, again, that's details. Once you open the door, you may open it for a
Hmm.
particular sort at first, but reality has this funny way of coming to slap you in the face. So what is going to happen over time? And I think it's one thing that we must understand. If we go as far back as we can in history, none of us was is from the soil where we are. Human beings have always moved. People will always move to seek a better life. You'll hear all the Trump rhetoric of or the MAGA rhetoric of America, blah blah. Go back just 500 years. How many Caucasian people were in what is now called the United States? They were not there. Go back 200 years. A majority of those who now claim to be American, Mr. Trump himself, his grandfather was not born in the United States.
I mean,
His grandfather
didn't
came
the
to the United States
chancellor
aboard a boat. And yes, the
didn't the
Chancellor of
chancellor show
Germany
him
did
his
his grandfather's
grandfather's
birth
better?
certificate. So human beings have always moved. What makes the current wave a bit toxic is the fact that, quote and unquote, it is the wrong kind of people. I mean, and nothing embodies this better than Trump himself when he said, "Oh, why can't we get migrants from Norway?" Now, here's the thing: Norway has a far better quality of life than the United States. There isn't much motivation for people from Norway to move. Come and visit, yes. Move, yes.
And you know that is the again going back to our conversation around the reasons for some of the ethnic or some of the pushback we're seeing now. It's that underlying racism there, because when you go through some of the comments on remigration online, what you always see as a theme that runs through is let's get all the brown and black people out. The migrants from European countries can stay, and we've talked about this in an earlier episode. The unintended consequence of Brexit was that when the Europeans went back to the EU because of stopping the freedom of movement, suddenly the UK economy, as you've noted just a few moments ago, was short of workers. And they realized pretty soon that if we're going to be able to provide the services that we should to our population, we need workers and we need them now, which led to the increase in the number of net migration. So it's that thing of the whole conversation around migration is a coded, not so secret code to say we don't want people who don't have Caucasian ancestry.
The word is
But
dog whistle.
yeah, but if you look at again just the services and how this will affect the UK, and I don't understand, and I'm setting myself up here, Chita. I don't understand why the government is not making a case for the absolute need of migrants now in the workforce. Now, whether the likes of Farage want to come and say, well, why don't we bring them from Sweden or whatever, that's one thing. But if you look at the numbers don't lie. About 36% of doctors and 30% of nurses are non-UK nationals.
20% of the NHS are foreign born.
It So
So
if you look at adult
let me
social care, so again, if you come back to like Derby, where I'm a councillor, about seven, and this is again is true for most local councils, about 70% of our generated income is spent, of our income, not even generated, but of our income, whether it's from the national government or not, is spent on adult social care. And now in 2023, 2024, you had about 105,000 people from overseas into direct care roles. So if for some reason, and I agree with you that yes, remigration is a long way from happening, it will not even happen. But if for some reason there was a magic wand and remigration happened, you would have the
collapse.
country not just on its knees, but deep into
Collapse.
the
The word is collapse.
collapse. Yeah, but it's
Here's the
almost like
thing.
people like Farage are selling a utopia that they in their most lucid of dumb moments knows will not happen.
So here's the thing. It's about so first things first, it's about route to power. Um, Again, like I said at the start, human beings deep down we tend to be very nativist. So it's easy for somebody to come and press people's buttons and as a result of that, appeal to people. That's what someone like Farage has done. They've simply moved the conversation to the right. Now, a problem with the West generally, not just the UK, is that the West no longer has politicians who can stand, or doesn't have many politicians, because it will be in the UK alone, I can name probably 3 or 4 who can stand up and tell the crowd what the crowd does not want to hear. Instead, what has become, and this is the tragedy of Western politics generally, it's now become about the next election. So, because of that, political actors are always looking at polling. What is it that that I can tell people that they will vote for me? Everybody's afraid of losing office. And that's what you are seeing with the politicians from your party right now.
I said
They
I
are
walked into
so
it.
afraid of losing office that they are shifting the Labour Party to the right, forgetting the fundamental lesson that when you shift to any of the extremes, the people who already occupy that extreme can move even further. So essentially, what has happened in the UK, in the US, in the Netherlands, is that the Overton window for discussion has shifted right. So there are things that the open racism, for example, in that tweet that you read out, the open racism that was completely unacceptable 20 years ago has become acceptable because the Overton window of conversation has shifted. How
And
do you?
Cheta, for those who are not as smart as you are, this
Oh,
speaker
thank you.
included, please explain to us what the Overton window is.
Overton window basically is the allowed is the kind of things that are allowed in decent conversation. End of. The,
Mm.
I'm not going to go into technical political science definitions. The kind of things that are allowed in decent conversation. So, for example, using the use of the N word is strictly outside the Overton window, except if you are in many cases. So, for example, if two of us are in the United States, the use of the N word is outside the Overton window for us because we're African,
Mm.
but it's not outside the Overton window for an African American. You understand? So basically, the Overton window are things where the Overton window is what is allowed or what is conventional.
What you can see around the dinner table,
What you can
basically.
say, well, not around the dinner table because the dinner table is supposed to be private, so you can say anything you want.
Mm.
The Overton window is about public discourse.
True.
Yeah. So what you can say around the dinner table, or what you can say on the public soapbox, yeah,
Mm.
that's the expression. What you can
Aha.
say what you can say in the market square, the things that you can say in the market square fall within the Overton window. So what has happened in the UK is that the Overton window has been shifted rightward because politicians afraid of what could happen at the next election have allowed certain people to run away with the narratives. If so, and this so it's so I think that one of the things that has caused that is an industry that I'm a part of, or that let me not say I'm because that's not the only thing that I do, but the organization I work for does that work. Polling. Politicians commission polling to get sentiment, voter sentiments, and rather than look at that voter sentiment and try to come up with narratives to help shift that voter sentiment, which is hard work. Many of them take the lazy route of pandering to that voter sentiment. So, and here I would call out your Oga in the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, because that thing that he said in the white
White
paper
paper.
that kicked off this podcast, the whole islands of strangers, is basically is something that he picked up almost from Enoch Powell's 1968 Rivers of Blood speech. It was jarring to hear somebody from the Labour Party, which is traditionally the party of workers, the party of the working class in the UK, using that expression because the UK has a class system. And the people who could afford to be this, who could be superior, who could feel superior, were those who were in the upper classes, the middle and the upper classes, which who tended to be in the conservatives. The people who were in the working classes tended to mix more easily with people from other races, the Windrush and the rest, because at the end of the day, all of us are in this together. We are
Yeah.
suffering from the jackboots of the oppressors. There's a reason why, for example, the unions, when Churchill was alive, the unions did not like Churchill for any reason. Then suddenly you hear somebody from that Labour Party, the party of the workers, the party that has traditionally allowed people. I mean, it's not an accident that people like Diana Abbott were all in the Labour Party. Then suddenly it is somebody from that Labour Party that you are hearing using Islands of Strangers. That tells you that the Overton window has shifted to the right.
And so the question then arising from there, because you mentioned, and it's quite interesting. You talk about the class system, and which is still prevalent anyway. However, has politics then moved more from class to, for lack of a better phrase, ethnic considerations? Because when you look at some of the places where, if you look at recent polling, where even a reform is projected to win if elections were held today, these are places you would normally say or think were, um, well, Labour strongholds. Or if you look at even the result from Brexit, you would think that places where the unions had a stronghold would not would see the reason for collective bargaining or collective unity. However, that logic has been turned on its head because you're seeing a reform that is anti-migrant, which you would think working people would closely align with because, as you said, we're all in this together. And shout out to Dave, that's lovely album from him. Um, but you see that these places are, despite their working class um, backgrounds, are now the places where reforms messages are taking hold a lot stronger. So has politics then moved from just economic considerations, which now seem to be a cover for something even more deeper, and that is the idea of ethnicity? However, if you want an excuse, I'll say it's the economy, stupid.
It's a combination of both, to be honest. And I think it's important that we have some empathy and also look at things from the viewpoint of people who feel. So one thing is that most human beings cannot really handle change. So when change is rapid, it leaves people feeling disoriented. So think about it this way. As of the year 2000, only 7 or 8% of the British population was foreign born. As of the 2021 census, that had risen to 16%. So essentially, the proportion of the population that was foreign born doubled in 20 years. 20 years is not up to a lifetime, it's not up to a
Mm.
generation. So that's a massive change that has happened in less than a lifetime.
In fact, that is someone who started working when they were 20 has not even reached the age of retirement. So
Exactly.
in the span of someone's
Working life.
working life, in
In the
fact, not
span
even
of
up to,
in,
yeah,
in, in span of half of someone's working
yeah.
life, because the average working life, if you did not go to university, the average career is about 43 years or
Hmm,
47 years, sorry. If you did not go to if you started working straight out of secondary school,
yeah.
then you have 47 years of work. So it's not even up to half of a working life, and the ethnic composition of the population has shifted so dramatically in that period. Again, it would come to the laziness of the political class, the basically going for easy solutions. So let's give a practical example. In 2008, the British Medical Association wrote to the then government of Gordon Brown to put a cap on the number of doctors that were being trained because they did not want to devalue the medical profession, and the government agreed with them. Fast forward, because of that, the Britain put a cap on. I don't remember the exact number of doctors that could be trained per year. But what happened was suddenly events happened, things happened that a lot of British doctors began to move to places where they got better pay, Australia, Canada, the United States. So that left Britain suddenly short-staffed. They didn't leave the cap. And even if they had lifted the cap then, because a lot of these shortages began about 2012, 2013. If they had lifted the cap then, it would have still been maybe another 8 to 10 years before they would be able to feed it. But
Qualify,
what did
yeah.
they do? They began to dip into other countries. So to a Nigerian doctor earning 250,000 naira a month as of 2015, which at the time was £1,000 a month. When you come to offer him a salary of £5,000 a month, he would move, because all it simply means is relocating, and suddenly his earning power has gone up by a factor of 5. And it was easier for a Nigerian doctor suddenly to relocate as of that 2015. It was easier for him to relocate than it was for him to relocate to Canada or the US. Many Nigerians relocating to Australia did not really come to the heads of so many Nigerians until somewhere within the last 5 years, for the simple reason that Australia is the other end of the world. Everybody understands that if you move to Australia, you will not see Nigeria again for the next donkey years. When they began to lose a lot of doctors, rather than training native-born doctors, they began to dip into other countries. And this basically repeated itself in so many places. So who gets the blame here? Is it the immigrants for coming? No. It's the political class for pursuing the easy way out. Now, another thing is that this has been cyclical for quite a bit now. It's been cyclical in the sense that they things happen, they draw on immigrants, they attract a lot of immigrants, and then they begin to scream about immigrants. A statistic that jumps out at me is that I think it was as of the start of the Tony Blair government in 1997, there were I think 16 net migration was 69,000 or something of the sort. Definitely less than 100,000. Now, well, it's gone down to 450 or 300, 450,000. But as of the last year of Rishi Sunak, it was 700 and. But again, another thing that they don't talk about a lot is the fact that two things boosted net migration precipitously: war in Ukraine and Hong Kong. Both geopolitical events that because Britain still likes to see itself as a major player on the world stage, got very heavily involved in. Hong Kong, in order to put a finger in China's eye; Ukraine, in order to put a finger in Russia's eye. We are not talking about the right or wrong or morality. Playing geopolitics, Britain got involved because they wanted to stick
Have a
it up to a
foothold in those
geopolitical
spaces.
adversary. And as a result, they got a lot of immigrants in. All of those immigrants, Ukrainians, Hong Kongians, are counted as part of net migration.
So which is also, again, it brings me back to that thing of is the far right, which I probably know the answer to this, focusing on what they would call the wrong sort of immigrants. Because when you look at their remigration theory, the idea is that it doesn't even matter if you were born here, if you're a citizen, as long as you're the wrong color, you're out. Because if you have this number of people from Hong Kong, from Ukraine, who have been brought here uh, because of, again, the geopolitical politics of it all, but most of the protests, if not all, are around hotels housing people from specific um,
I think we should say that
ethnic
it is
identities.
religious identity right now. I said
Yeah,
it last week and I repeat it.
or
Right now, the people in the crosshairs for the most part are Muslims. People who are
UK.
from
The UK has become an increasingly anti-Muslim country.
not
Sadly,
just the UK, Europe.
Europe. So the question is, do these guys know something we don't know, or has it always just been there? But anyway,
It has always been there. I mean, this is something that goes back more than 1,000 years to about 1,000 years to the Crusades.
hmm,
There's been this antipathy towards Muslims, and so whenever, I mean, as with every group of human beings, there will be some badly behaved Muslims. So one of the things about Islam as a religion, Islam is unashamedly political. Unlike Christianity that tries to pretend that it's not political. I mean, the founder of Christianity, or the person, you can make the argument that Christianity was founded by Paul. There are a lot of people who say it was founded by Jesus Christ. Um, Whichever way, neither of them had the luxury of being a political leader, because they lived during the time of the Roman Empire. And if they had tried to become a political leader, they would have quickly ended up crucified or beheaded, which is what happened to both of them anyway. But it would have been quicker. Um,
you can argue that, and sorry to cut you, you can argue that standing against the ideals of the moment was quite a political as much as it was a religious um
it wasn't
experience.
overtly political.
It
I mean,
wasn't
if you
overtly.
yeah,
However,
if
when
you
people
read your
say,
Bible, if you
yeah,
read your Bible, Jesus Christ was at pains not to be political.
oh
So, for
yes,
example,
but
render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar.
definitely. However, remember he
Muhammad,
will
on the
say,
other hand,
"My kingdom is not the kingdom of this one." Now we're going into theology. Which, if you were a Roman official, you would be like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 hang on, hang on." You know,
no,
how do you?
Njukwe,
Yeah.
don't forget that it was the chief priest. The Romans just looked at the whole thing the Romans in their initial look at Jesus Christ and his menagerie was this is a Jewish matter, it's an internal matter, we're not getting involved. It was the Sanhedrin, the chief priests, that carried it to the Romans. And remember, at first Pilate said, hey,
Wash my hands.
I no, that was at first he said, I don't find anything wrong with this man. Take him, deal with him according to your own laws. Then it was the chief priest who now told him, oh, he had compared himself to Caesar. Any man who compares himself to Caesar is an enemy of
Hmm.
any man who is an enemy of Caesar is an enemy of Rome. And that was when it became political. Now, going back to my point, Muhammad, on the other hand, was not just a religious leader, he was also a political leader and he was a military leader. So as a result, the Muslim Ummah doesn't. So if you listen to the ideology of organizations like Al Qaeda, ISIS, they don't look at nation states like Syria, Iraq, all of that. They don't look at them as nation states. They look at all of this as the caliphates. The borders don't mean anything to them. The borders that were set up with the rise of nation states in the Middle East after the Sykes-Picot Pact, those borders don't mean anything to those guys. So there's this underlying fear within the right wing that people who come from those parts of the world will never be loyal to, in this case, Britain, that they will always be loyal to this caliphate. Another group that has suffered that kind of behavior throughout history and still suffers it, even though in many respects they're dishing it out to other groups right now, are Jews.
Hmm.
Jews have always suffered that from that trope. Yeah, trope is the word I was looking for. From that trope that, oh, they are loyal to something else other than the nation. So that's the reason why a lot of anger is being directed towards Muslims right now, because of that belief that the Muslims will not be loyal to the UK, instead they'll be loyal to Mecca.
Well, that's a lot to take in, and I think it's a good place, to draw the curtain on this episode. However, being that this podcast is about how UK politics affects the African communities here, Chita, what will be your last words as we get into this not so summer of love to the communities?
Well, number one, I think, and this comes back, I will keep putting you on the spot. You are a politician, you are a councillor, you have access. There are five key things that our communities bring to countries like the UK. We bring economic contributions. Um, it cannot be, again, we said migrants are 20% of the NHS. That's a major economic contribution. Taxes are extracted from us. We fill in labor shortages. We provide cultural enrichments. I think one thing that the nativist people tend to forget is that culture is a sum total of the experiences of all the people. Let's put it like this: fish and chips, which is that most basic of British food, was brought to the UK by migrants. Fish and chips is not native to the UK.
Hurry, my dear.
Curry, for example, I prefer to call it curry the way we used to call it back home. Yeah, well, I could form British and say curry, curry.
Curry.
So we need to be able to articulate our positive contributions and then
Hmm.
stand. So as an example, when those kind of people say, "Oh, there was this disgusting headline in the Times a few days ago," that's was it the Times or the Telegraph? I know I read it in one of them that said 8% of the British population are foreign born. Hello, 16% of the British population are foreign born. If 8% of the British population are foreign born, what that tells me is that proportionally far less of the foreign born population are prone to crime. That message needs to be hammered down. And
You
of
know,
course, finally, the whole argument of that these foreigners are a drain on the public services and all of that bullshit. Please, basically, your visa conditions make it very clear that you cannot have recourse to public
public
funds.
funds.
You have to work and
In fact,
contribute.
you know, this same thing, I said it to residents when when talking to residents, and they kept going on about how the migrants public service. I went, hang on, hang on, hang on. When I broke down how much I had to pay to the British government in order for to be
For the
allowed to
pleasure
stay
of
here,
coming.
and then how much you have to pay into the NHS, she was shocked because she thought, oh no, but I thought I heard. I'm like, no. And you see, this is also the problem. At the risk of siding with you to put me on the spot, I would say this is what the government isn't doing. They are not highlighting these things because there's only a small, minuscule percentage of people who are coming through the channel on boats.
Let's what you have just let me point out something again.
Mm,
Going to the Times on Monday, that was Monday just passed, which was the 4th of August. The Times published an article
mm,
that said that ran with the headline 50% of Britons wants immigrants gone. Now they ran with that headline, but deep down in the article there was something that those 50% who wanted immigrants gone, wanted illegal immigrants gone, not legal immigrants. And they believed
mm.
that's 50% believed that illegal immigration was the majority of migration to the UK. But in the same article, it was pointed out that the poll that they were citing actually pointed out that illegal migration is 4% of migration. So that is a complete failure of governments, of not just governments, of the media to inform people. And
But the media doesn't
those are
want
the
to
kind of
inform
things
people. They
that
want to
again,
sell.
those are the kind of things that tell me, and it's not just a British problem, it's a Western problem. And
Mhm.
as a Nigerian, I understand this completely, and it tells me that the democracy is in trouble in all of these countries. Because for a democracy to be healthy, the media has to inform people in order for them to make the right choices. What we are seeing now is the media playing politics
I agree.
because of whatever bias they have. I mean, it was ironic that that very same day on LBC, Nick Ferrari interviewed Nigel Farage. No pushback whatsoever. And this is something that keeps happening. Nigel Farage comes to the media and he doesn't get any pushback. He just comes and
Yeah,
says
no,
whatever he wants to say.
but again, Nick Ferrer, everyone knows Nick Ferrari's allegiance. So even when he appears or does that, it's fun listening to him sometimes because there are times when he goes
He's
like,
a fine
"Oh,
broadcaster. I like listening to him.
no, he's good." That's not in doubt. But he puts up a show about pushing back, but you know that, come on, Nick, this isn't really pushback. You're
Yeah,
the
of course.
you're enabling these guys. But I look, I agree with you, especially with migrants having to realize that we and having to also, if the government is not going to make the case, then we do need to make the case in our spaces
Now,
because
wow.
on average,
Now,
migrants pay
wow.
four
You want
thousand
to play?
pounds.
Now, wow. You sound very
Well,
much like a Nigerian politician. You know that kind of,
uh,
you are in the government, but you are saying the government has to.
not say I'm a counselor in Derby, but I'm also
You're in
very
the
aware.
government.
No, I'm also very aware that I'm in the crosshairs of whatever policies come because I'm Nigerian. So I'm
Okay,
aware that
fair enough.
I'm aware that I get no extra token points for being uh for being a counselor
But
because
but the
if
irony is that you are in the government, so you
and
have to
and I
push back
oh
within the government.
and I do speak up, and
Okay,
I'm
well,
happy to say that uh because I protested a lot, the cabinet in Derby City had to make a statement on that white paper to say, look, uh we understand how communities are feeling now, and these are the avenues you can take use to show your grievance. Because again, let's be honest, if we are not in the spaces where conversations around us and decisions around us are being made, we are setting ourselves up for failure. Which is why I would always, and I was speaking to someone just yesterday, and I said, look, yes, I understand we're angry, but we can't stop at being angry. We need to take part in the process, because
I
that
completely
way,
agree with you.
we need to write to our MPs, write to your councillors, let them know that, look, these things, this is how they affect us, so that they know that there are voices that need to be heard as well. Because, and I was about to say this, on average, migrants contribute £4,000 more per year in taxes. And I'll say this again. Cheta, yourself, myself, how, we are here one legally, but because we
Expats.
had, and we're here, legally. But because part of our visa conditions is that we had to pay for the NHS surcharge, which means that every month when we get our pay slip and we are also being charged, and part of our taxes are being paid to the NHS, we're paying twice. We're being charged twice to use the NHS, but we keep our heads down. So we shouldn't let people like Farage and his ilk to define our place or our contributions and let people think that we are not making any contributions. We are. But to do that, we also can't afford, we should not afford to sit down and say, you know what, I'm not going to take part in any political discourse, because we're doing ourselves a lot more harm than good. And for me, that's my final word.
It's a very good way to end it. I think my own final word will be: we can't afford to make the same mistakes that we made back home.
Mhm.
One of the key things that's led to the worst of us governing or ruling, as they like to say in Nigeria, is the fact that the good people fail to get involved in politics. You can't afford not to.
Mm. And on that note, we can't afford to carry on with this podcast today. We'll have to draw the curtain, but we'll see you at the next one.
See you next week.